All right. Great to have you.
Yeah, this is oh, thanks so much. This is a great honor. I just saw that you finished your 250th show, and basically I'm looking at the roster. It's a who's who of the punk, hardcore, and indie elite. So basically, yeah. So this is a great honor.
And you liked my government issue shirt. I like what you said before about Tom Lyle.
Oh man, I worship government issue. The thing is that when I was in Bullet LaVolta in particular, that was the band that really brought us all together. And we're talking 86 or so. And we completely, and it was Lyle that was the person, because it was guitar tone and also as a guitarist. I mean, I would say that Lyle is my favorite guitarist in the world, more so than, you know, Ingve or basically Jimmy Page or anyone. I mean, seriously, he's the absolute greatest. And I listen um, probably the government, still to this day, to government issue more than any other band ever. So it's an all stages. And also, to tell you the truth, as they often ask on the internet, name a celebrity death that choked you up or whatever. And I can only think of two that really, really, really affected me. People I didn't know, but that really affected me. And one is Stab. I'm actually getting a little choked up thinking about Stab. I mean, basically, and Sylvester is the other one, basically in the 80s. But it was Stab's death, and just tracing his whole. I'd seen GI any number of times, but basically being on Facebook and seeing his sort of battle with cancer, and I mean, just yeah, it really, really affected me. It's still now I'm actually sort of tearing up thinking about Stab.
Yeah, just being associated with the U record for me. I mean, I love all their earlier stuff, but to me, the U
Oh,
record, they really put it together. And it's still one of my favorite. I can't believe I worked on that record because it's
oh,
one of the greatest records ever made, I think.
Oh, it was. I remember putting it on the turntable the first time I used to work at WHRB, the college radio station, and the first time I ever heard it, we got at the station, and we had this old Technics turntable. I don't want to say old. It was a great turntable. It was an old one, hooked up to some sort of crappy speakers. We put it on, and was like a life-changing experience. I just couldn't believe that this record existed. And then when I was in Bullet LaVolta, I'm getting ahead of the story here, but when I was in Bullet LaVolta, it was Bill Whalen, the bass player, now sadly departed. He
Yeah.
was the ultimate GI fan, and it
Really?
was, oh my god, it was just, yeah, it was we all worship GI, but basically he was more so than anybody. And then there was another moment. This is like late 80s. That Clay Tarver from Bullet LaVolta actually met and had a meal with Tom Lyle, and we felt like that this was like the pantheon. I mean, it was like unbelievable. It was the type of thing that we couldn't believe our luck that we actually had sort of 1 degree of separation from this guy.
Oh,
So,
that's fantastic, man,
oh
that you
yeah,
love GI. Yeah, they're one of
yeah.
my favorites. I
I
think
didn't
I
expect I didn't expect to get teary-eyed so early in the morning, but just thinking about Stab, I mean, basically, and he was an amazing, just as a performer, as an impresario, as an animator, not just of the band, but the entire scene. He was the glue. I think that there were so many great bands that came out of DC, but he was the glue that kept that entire scene together, that tied together the Maryland, the DC, the North of Virginia, and then basically export. He was, everyone knows Minor Threat, et cetera, but he was the one who really exported DC hardcore, so.
you're right about that. I know my friend Al Quint feels the same way about government issue. We love talking about them. There's so many good things to talk about. We can get back into that some more, but I wanted to talk about you for a little, well, for a lot actually. I think I read somewhere that you're from Scranton.
Totally, yeah. It's usually the first thing. Actually, I'm going to turn off. I'm going to get pings from my work email here unless I turn it off. Yeah, this is usually the first thing I tell people about myself. I'm from Scranton, Pennsylvania, and I'm really, really, really proud to be from Scranton. I have my family's been from coal miners, et cetera, from northeastern Pennsylvania, and so I strongly identify with the area. But the other thing that I tell people, the second thing, is that I grew up on the same street as Joe Biden and went to the same grade school and the same church.
You
Now
did?
17, yeah, 17
Wow.
years apart. But the thing is that Biden's Scranton shtick is for real. I mean, it's like he's actually a known figure in the neighborhood, and people know him, remember him. He knows people. and basically it's not a put on, and it's a real people of a certain age either all remember Biden or they pretend to remember Biden, but basically it's a real Scranton thing. But the other thing about Scranton is that it had this overheated music scene in the 60s and 70s, not so much original bands, but like a ridiculous amount of cover bands of just a really high level that never made it out of northeastern Pennsylvania. So that was like my formation, was hanging
Cover
out, playing
bands.
in band, playing in bands, and basically, and some of them were really ambitious. There'd be like, you know, a Yes tribute band or Emerson, Lake and Palmer tribute, and people carrying around their Hammond B3s like so they could be like Keith Emerson. It was just like, and these are 17-year-old kids, and like everyone basically, I mean, it was just an overheated scene. We're talking mid-70s, and there was only one band ever that made it out of northeastern Pennsylvania. It was a band called the Boys, Buoys, that had a one-hit wonder called Timothy.
Yeah, I remember them. Yeah.
And so basically, I'll just show you what just to prove it. We worship. Basically, this is the this is called Somebody Else's Dream. It's a book on the Boys. I'm sort of embarrassed about my background here, but basically,
you people listening will have to go on YouTube for this part to check out the book.
It's like,
you know, I lived in Western PA I lived in Pittsburgh for 5 years, but I used to drive down 84 all the time. So I feel like I think I may have stopped in Scranton a couple of times, actually, because I usually stop in different places and check them out. When you were growing up there, besides all these cover bands and everything, what were you listening to, and what kind of music did you get into when you were like a teenager?
Yeah, well, the important thing is I was born in 59, so in the Eisenhower era. And so basically I was 17 when I went to college, which was 1977, which was peak. Punk rock hit me like no tomorrow. I mean, it was just like, it was the moment I had moved away from home. I was a little late, you know, it was September of 77, but basically it was in September of 77, I first started listening to the Clash, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And that just like changed my life. And I just knew that was a direction I was going to go on in perpetuity. But growing up, you know, my friends and I, we all listened to prog rock. We listened to Yes, we listened to Genesis. But basically my absolute favorite was Mahavishnu Orchestra. And basically, so in Scranton, you know, the thing is, I listened to a lot of jazz. I listened to a lot of stuff on the ECM label. And, you know, I remember John Abercrombie, et cetera, this type of thing, you know, especially guitar related stuff. But McLaughlin with Mahavishnu was amazing. The other thing is about Scranton is that, you know, a lot of touring bands came through. So I went to see every single band that you could possibly imagine since I was like age 12. And, you know, and everything was walking distance at that time, you know, at least for the big venues from where I was living in Scranton. And so saw lots and lots of bands, and, you know, but, you know, a lot of them made a sort of negative impact on me. I went to see Kiss, for example, and I just thought it was stupid and ridiculous. I mean, I just felt it was over bloated. I didn't think it was all that great. I thought it was just complete hype. You know, the basic songs I thought were okay, but like the whole persona, the live act, you know, and, you know, whatever. And so a lot of this stuff was sort of leaving me cold. And so that's like when in 77, things really, I mean, I just saw the Talking Heads very early in sort of October of 77. I saw in a juice bar in Bryn Mawr, Pennsylvania. And, you know, you could still see bands at really small venues in 77, 78. And then I was determined I had to get to England. And so I went in the summer of 78 and tried to see as many bands as I could.
Really?
Yeah. I went to the Marquee every night, and, you know, and the band, believe it or not, the best of all the ones I saw, and this was 78. I mean, it was still going really strong.
Yeah.
But it wasn't the same, like, you know, the same feeling as a year previous when you have like Clash, Sex Pistols, and Susie all on the same bill. I mean, that had moved on. But there was the whole other layer, you know, the bands of the level of like the Lurkers and the Boys, Boys, who I thought were the best of all the bands by far. You know, you could still catch those bands. And also it was a smaller scene, you know. It was like, you know, the thing is, but then I actually moved to the UK in 79 to 80. for a year at University of Edinburgh, and that was ridiculous. And in fact, actually, I saw so many bands. I mean, and to the point where I had a ticket to see Specials, Madness, and Selector, and I gave it away because I had to write a paper for the next morning. I mean, it was just like so much stuff. And at that point, the big bands were even bigger. Like I saw the Clash for the first time, but they were in a very big venue. I mean, not a stadium, but they were in a sort of a concert hall. A friend of mine said, "Do you want to go see Joy Division?" And I said, "No." Again, I have an exam the next day or whatever. No. But the show never happened. The Edinburgh show never happened because then Ian Curtis took his life and his own life. Yeah, and so the show never happened. But I remember. But there was so much stuff happening. And I also, and then I went back to the UK another time, 81 to 83 for 2 more years. So I lived in the UK for 3 years in my youth. And that, again, was ridiculous. I mean, basically, so I decided to follow the birthday party. I mean, to actually follow them. It was the only time I've ever followed a band. Like wherever they would play, I would just go.
Wow.
And yeah, and to the point where Nick Cave actually would recognize me in the audience. I mean, basically I was at every, like if it was a show, I was there. And because that was, again, it was something that just spoke to my soul. I was just like, I couldn't believe the band existed, how great they were live. And they were just like, not just musically, but just every single member, as you know, of that band had like the strongest persona. But then you see them on the street, in London. I mean, it was just like, it was not basically because, on Portobello Road or, Kings Road or, some of the clusters of places, you just see them on the street.
Hey, so you play? Oh, I'm sorry. I was going to ask you, were you playing guitar yet by this point?
Yeah, I was basically, but everything up to this point, I was never in a successful band until Bullet LaVolta, which was fast forward to 87. But I was in high school cover bands. Basically, I actually formed a band called Nirvana in the 70s. Yeah, basically that was the name of the band. It was called Nirvana. Yeah, well, I wish we had stuck with it. And basically, yeah, and then but basically, lots of high school cover bands. In college, I had a band in Scotland that was sort of mod revival, believe it or not, but we never, it never went anywhere. And I played with a band called the Responsible Teenagers that actually recorded a single that I was not on. I joined the band after they recorded the single, and that was a ticket. The one thing that came out of that, we played at Max's Kansas City.
Wow.
Yeah, and that was, yeah, and so basically, we played at Max's. And this is 1980. And that was, again, it was a scene. I mean, basically, Hell's Angels did the security. And basically, if you argue, the club was at the top of a very tall flight of stairs. And the 2 things I remember about the evening was not even the performance, but one is the Hell's Angels parked their motorcycles that you can move your van in, but they left very little space. And so basically, the parallel parking between the 2 Hell's Angels Harleys was like the most harrowing experience. I wasn't driving the van, but basically just that was terrifying. But then I remember you had to go up you were treated like royalty if you're in the band, but if you started like haggling, I'm on the guest list, the Hells Angels would push you down the stairs. I mean, basically a flight of like 36 stairs.
At least you didn't get stabbed,
Oh my God. Yeah, it was like Ultimate. It would have been Ultimate. Yeah. So anyway, I was in all these bands that went nowhere. But then finally, in 81 to 83, 82, 83, I formed a psychedelic revival band called The Beyond, and which was actually successful. We had, I was doing, it sounds lame, but basically I was doing a degree at Oxford at the time. It doesn't sound very punk rock, but basically, but basically formed this band, and we had a lot of gigs at Oxford, but we got our single reviewed in Melody Maker and Sounds.
I didn't know about The Beyond. You got me.
Oh yeah, I'll send you some links.
I love swag. I got to talk to you about this for a minute here, because before we get into all the Boston stuff, right. Your education is remarkable. And, I've had a lot of smart people on the show. People are surprised, like I had Dr. Greg Turner on the show, who comes from a hardcore, Ben Diley, another Harvard guy.
Yeah, totally. Yes.
LEV from the Charms, Vassar. That's a pretty high school. Linnea Herzog, who's a PhD also. She's Neurology. I think you know what, I'm a media communications guy, so forgive me, but I've had a lot of people on my show that actually have major degrees, and now I have you're also a PhD. I have you here. You went to Penn, you went to school in Rome, you got a master's at Oxford and a PhD in Harvard. How does all this fit in with your rock and roll lifestyle? It's like bizarre, because when I was a kid growing up, I used to think all the poor kids were the rockers. Well, Brian May's one of my favorite guitarists, and he's
Oh
a
yeah.
PhD also. But how did you manage with this kind of education on a high level to like play at the same time as well?
Yeah, I never took any time off. That's the thing. I've never took a gap year or took time off, or I was in school constantly the entire time. And it was toward the end. That's why, to cut to the chase, why I had to leave the Lemonheads. At that point, I ran out of my luck because I became an assistant professor at Bryn Mawr College, and you can't really be a tenure track assistant professor and being in a touring band at the same time.
Yeah.
So that's like, so if people ask, why did you leave the Lemonheads? The reason I left the Lemonheads is I never took any time off, and I completely burned the candle at both ends. And but it's the only reason I got through any of those degrees was because of rock, and particularly punk. The only reason is because it kept my sanity basically at every one of those places you mentioned, especially Harvard. And it was, talk about work-life balance. Well, basically the balance was, I was pretty much, my main commitment, especially toward the end, was pretty much toward rock and roll. But but basically then toward the end, I sort of ran out of options.
When you were at Penn, because you went there for 4 years, right?
3 years. I spent 1 year at Edinburgh. Basically, I spent a junior year abroad at Edinburgh with 79-80.
So did you see a lot of bands in Philadelphia? Because that was a pretty active scene back then.
Oh, totally. Yeah. It was like, again, basically, if I went through, one thing I promised myself never to do is to look at club listings of any city I ever lived in, basically historic club listings. Because if I saw all the bands I missed, and I once just looked at one, if you go back and take a look at, people post this stuff on the internet all the time. What's happening on a typical, week in 84, 85, 86 in Boston. And, basically on any given night, you have 12 to 15 venues. And then each one of those venues has 3 to 5 bands, and every single one of them, the name of, the songs. And I mean,
it's insane.
It's insane. And so basically, this is the same. I feel the same way about going back to Philadelphia in the 70s. The main club, there was 2 clubs. One was called the Hot Club, which was a phenomenal punk rock club, like in the sort of great. The Hot Club was like on the circuit. People would play like the Edge in Toronto, the Rat in Boston, or other places. CB's in New York, then come down to the Hot Club, and then I don't know if the 930 was functioning already in the 70s, but a lot of people went through there. The best show, I saw a number of shows. The best show ever I saw was 999, the British band.
Homicide.
Homicide. Yeah, they were again. I saw them again in London as well, and they were phenomenal. Again, it's if you made your list of the 100 greatest British punk bands of the 70s, 999 might not make the cut, but live they were better. They actually could play their instruments, and were really they were really good. And so I remember them distinctly. But I'm sure I could have seen Pure Hell, or one of these great bands of Philadelphia in the 70s. But
well, I was looking at your timeline, and if you graduated in 77, that means in college in the around 80, 81, you would have been in Philadelphia, which is when, GI and all those bands really started taking off.
Yes.
I also read about Super Fetizzone, an Italian.
Super Fetizzone. I'm very proud of Super Fetizzone.
Was that that wasn't your first band, because you mentioned the Beyond, but this was a band that you played in Italy.
Yes, between the here's the 30-second version of the story. I was in Bullet LaVolta, but I had already, even when LaVolta hit it, I knew I was going to Rome, because I had won a fellowship to the American Academy in Rome, which is again a life-changing experience. Probably the most fundamental experience. Other than punk rock, the American Academy in Rome was the most important thing that happened to me. And so I knew I was going to Italy, and And so basically I went, and there wasn't much happening at all in rock. I mean, basically, again, I would see every show of every touring band that would come through Rome, which was not that many. The two shows that I saw in Rome, this is leading to Superfetazione, Suicide were the loudest band I had ever seen.
Wow.
There was the loudest. It was ridiculous how first of all how good they were, but that's the one thing I remember. It was unbelievably loud. But there was a squat in Rome called Forte Prenestino, and it's an old military, it's probably 19th century military base that was seized right before I got there, like in 85, and basically turned into a sort of autonomous anarchist community. And there have been so many efforts to close it down. It's still going strong. It's like now it has like a daycare center, it has a restaurant, it has a cinema. I mean, it's like completely a garden. It has, but that was the place where you'd see shows, but at risk of your life, because basically to see the bands, you had to go into an underground munitions bunker with like 30-foot walls through a narrow tunnel. And it was it's probably the biggest fire trap I've ever willingly put myself into. And but the shows there were just incredible. But the two great bands, I'll just limit to one. Again, it's a band you would never think that, you know, if you list the great 80s bands, you know, et cetera, it was RKL, Rich Kids on LSD.
Yeah.
I couldn't believe it. They were unbelievable. They were just as a live band, they were just I still think about it. I probably, when people ask me what's the best show you've ever been to in your life, was Rich Kids and LSD in Rome. And they were just unbelievable. So anyway, but I wanted to make some music of my own. I wanted to be part of the scene. I wanted to play at the Forte. And so I met these two kids, I think on the Rome Metro. And one of them had a Husker Du, if I remember, I think one of them had a Husker Du shirt or whatever. And one was 15. No, they were both 15. And I'm like 28 at this time, right? And so basically we start talking, and one plays drums and the other one plays bass, and I played guitar. I said, let's form a band. And we needed a singer. And we got this, we didn't, so there was someone at the American Academy in Rome who was a fairly noted designer, basically an architect. His name was George Querrell, and he sang, he was 42 years old at the time. And I couldn't believe that anyone could reach the age of 42. That was like the oldest person I knew. I couldn't believe you're 42 years old. But he was 42 years old. He was the singer, and we had the two 15-year-old, the drummer and the bass player. And it was actually good. We used to practice in this space, which still exists, a stone's throw from the Fountain of Trevi, this sort of underground chamber where you can make total noise. And it was so much fun. And these guys have remained like some of my best friends in the world. And to the point where the last time I played with them was last year. I mean, basically we still, whenever in Italy, we play a show. And so basically October 2022 was the last show I played with them. And
I think I got my so you played in the Italian band in the late 80s? Because I thought it would be earlier.
It's just 1 year. It would have been 87, 88.
Okay, so you had already played with Bullet LaVolta at that point.
It was between Bullet LaVolta and the Lemonheads.
Yeah.
And there's actually the Lemonheads do a Superfetazione song. We covered a Superfetazione song, which is called
it's on Lick.
Yeah, on Lick, yeah.
Yeah, because he sings it in Italian. Evan sings in Italian. Yeah. Your career is really good, so I'm trying to get everything here. You became a DJ at WHRB Record Hospital, which is a famous like underground radio show. A lot of alumni from that show have gone on to work for labels, bands, whatever. That's when you met Clay, Bill, and Chris. So you guys were all DJs there?
It's slightly complicated, but not much. One thing, it's basically there's a cluster of bands that all feed into each other. But one band, surprisingly, is the band Meltdown. Meltdown was my first band in the 80s in Boston. And again, it was like we played in the house was on Green Street in Central Square, right near TT's, right near where the Middle East is now. And it's like literally one block away. So when we played TT's, we could actually wheel our equipment just to the club. I mean, just down the street. And it was great. And Meltdown was the singer is called Jeffrey. His name is Jeffrey Ray Wine. He's a screenwriter in Hollywood now. And then Alex Vera and Chris Guttmacher was the drummer, and I was the guitarist. And we were called Meltdown because we actually had a show at Harvard, and we didn't even have a name. for the band, like basically, and then Chernobyl happened. So we said Meltdown, and then it was so, I don't know how to describe it, but basically juvenile. We basically used like cut out from the Boston, papers, the Boston Herald, the headline for Meltdown, and that was the name of our band. But the band was trying to pay tribute to the metalcore crossover stuff of 85, 86. That was like our goal. And then basically the band continued, but Guttmacher played drums for also, while staying in Meltdown, he also played drums for LaVolta. So Chris came in from a different perspective. He came in with me from Meltdown, and then Clay and Bill, who are all these guys are much younger than me, that basically I met at Harvard. And then we advertised for a singer, and that's how we met Kurt Davis. And we were like, to tell you the truth, and I'm very open about this with Kurt, aka Yucky Guy. He had just come from Indiana and had been, he was completely plugged into the Indiana scene with the Zero Boys and all. He had done the artwork for the Zero Boys.
Yeah, his name's on their record. Yeah.
Oh yeah. Basically, and we met this guy, and we couldn't believe our luck. We said, like, I'm just paraphrasing here. It's like, finally someone's going to give our band some credibility, because like Clay and I'm not telling the story very well, but it was Chris and I were a pair. We had been in Meltdown. Clay and Bill were a pair because they were both Harvard varsity basketball players.
What? Yes, I didn't know that.
Yeah. And
Bill, they're tall.
Yeah. Bill was like an all-Maine athlete, basketball player. And Clay Tarver was an all-Texas sort of basketball player. Both were. And Bill was number 31 on the Harvard basketball team. And it was, so basically Bill was a serious basketball player. And so, but we all sort of converged on WHRB. So Bill and Clay and I were the DJs. And then we advertised, we auditioned a number of people, which is an interesting story. And then we finally met Kurt. We couldn't believe our luck. And Kurt also, this is the other thing, this goes to show this sort of punk rock mentality, or sort of whatever. We thought this was a dream come true, because not only did he have the credentials, he was a great singer, he was a great person, but he worked in a copy shop in Harvard Square. He worked at, I can't remember the name of it, a photocopy shop.
Perfect.
And we said, oh my God, this is incredible, basically, because free flyers, And so basically the fact he worked in there. And we also had, we practiced in Chris Guttmacher's house in Brookline, but also in the Harvard dorms. We had various. One thing about Harvard is that at least at the back of the day, there's these houses, the undergraduate houses, and there's 12 of them. When they say it's a house, it's 350, students. But basically, every year they would close one of the houses during the summer and be completely vacant for renovations. And the one I was living in, because I actually had an administrative job, again, it had a swimming pool, which has been since boarded over, and we could make total noise. And so we rehearsed in the Harvard house right there in the middle of Harvard Square, and it was just glorious. It was fantastic.
I didn't go to Harvard, but I did work at 7 Divinity Ave for 5 years. I worked in the molecular cellular biology graduate program. I had I was managing bands and working there. This is after I moved back to Boston from California. Let me get this straight here, because I'm trying to figure this out. I know you said the band formed in late 86 and the EP came out in 88.
Right.
The Rumble. Did you play for either Bullet LaVolta or the Lemonheads at the Rumble? Because they were both in it the same year in 88.
No, I didn't. Why do I think I went to the Rumble? Did I play in the Rumble? I can't remember. It was basically, I was out by, basically my time in LaVolta was, the peak was really the first 9 months of 87, or the first 8 months of 1987.
The reason I brought that up is I saw Bullet LaVolta 3 times, but it was all in LA. So I never saw you in the band. I didn't see Kenny either. I think when I saw the band, Kenny was already out too. It was after they got to the EP and then, the major label debut, which things didn't end well for Bullet. I had, oh my God, I'm having a mental. I can't even remember who I had on my show. The second drummer of Bullet LaVolta, which I'm having a total mental block right now on the show.
Phillips.
Yeah, Todd. I had Todd on the show. And I saw him too. I never saw you or Chris because the only time I saw the band in Boston was at the Rumble. And I was a judge that night and I voted for Bullet LaVolta.
Oh, awesome.
It was in
No,
'88.
I didn't play the Rumble. I used to go, every year, but it was like, the thing is, yeah, my performances, I probably only played a dozen shows with Bullet LaVolta, and maybe 15, I don't know, but they were good ones. I mean, I remember supporting Rollins. I don't know how I remember this, but I remember the band was paid a sold out show. We were paid $37.50, and yeah, so basically, I had met Rollins before, and I had met him at a signing at Newberry Comics. But then basically, we were at this. There was a moment. It was just Rollins and I were the only ones backstage, and he had this weird meditative. No, but he couldn't talk to him because he went into this like weird. Maybe he didn't, so he didn't have to talk to me, but he went into this like weird meditative, sort of like it was before going on this sort of. I don't know how to describe it. He creates this force field around himself and basically was like, hyper focused before going on. Of course, he was an unbelievable performer.
Yeah.
We played with Dag Nasty, and that was with Brian Baker. Oh my God.
Was this the Field Day era or?
This was, yes. And it was, I'm trying to remember who was in the.
Peter Kortner was Peter Kortner and Doug Carrion. Yeah, I put that Field Day record out too. Yeah, that was a good. It's funny because Todd, I'm sorry, I forgot. I don't know why I couldn't remember Todd Phillips. I blacked out for a minute there or something. He told me a story about how he met Kenny Chambers. You guys, all these weird connections between all these bands, the Lemonheads, Bullet LaVolta, Moving Targets, is amazing. It's like you guys were all one big group of guys
Blake Babies and also Belt Out. It was like basically it's all this sort of like the same mini scene and trading, members and stuff like that.
Yeah, because he told me he met Kenny at a Dag Nasty show. So I imagine all you guys are probably at the Dag Nasty show.
Also, and just to intersect, here's my life story in 10 seconds. I show up at Harvard in 1983, and I move into my dorm, and I put on the radio, and Curtis is on the radio, Curtis Casella.
Yeah.
And he's playing Boston hardcore. I never heard any of this stuff. He's playing DYS, he's playing SSD, he's playing Gangrene. And Tang 1 had not yet come out yet, but he was like promoting Tang records. And I had just come straight from the UK, and I wasn't really listening to punk in the UK because other than Discharge and GBH, I mean, a lot of stuff I didn't think was actually all that great. The sort of, the 1980s British Blitz, I saw all those bands, but basically it really wasn't that great. And I knew, and I was absent from 81 to 83, and I had an idea. I knew who the Descendants were and Black Flag, and I knew that stuff was happening in the United States that I was missing out on. But I have to confess, I didn't really know how awesome the Boston scene is when I moved there. I mean, I had, again, a vague awareness, but basically, with all those bands, just you can make a very long list. And Burma had just broken up or played their last show. Is that correct? In 83?
Yeah, I was at that show at the Bradford Hotel. Yes.
Bradford Hotel, yeah. So we're in the wake of it. So I show up, and I cannot tell you what my first week in Boston was like. First of all, I turn on the radio and I hear these. I say, I have to learn about all these bands. I want to be part of the scene. Then basically I show up at WHRB. I said, because I was a graduate student and it's an undergraduate organization, but I said, I really, really, really want to do this. This is like, I wanted to be a DJ more than anything else in my life on WHRB. So they assigned me to this guy called Dean Wareham. Dean Wareham is my trainer, right? And Wareham is he was the same then as he is now. And he says, you got to check out this band Mission of Burma. I said, I've never heard of them. He said, no, you got to put it. And then it was like one of these moments. I said, holy cow. And then, so you had the scene at WHRB, which, I mean, Wareham was just like one of many people. And he basically, the dean at the end of the year said, I have this band with this guy, Damon, and Krakowski and Naomi, and it's called Speedy and the Castanets. Would you produce it? So I remember going to hear one of their rehearsals, and I said, oh my God, these guys aren't going anywhere. Like, there's nothing I can do for them. famous last words. And so basically, of course, later, and Galaxy is also, part of it. I wouldn't say Galaxy was not part of our scene, but I knew them really, really well. And I actually taught Damon in a course as a teaching assistant. And then the other thing, this is just another Boston angle, is that there's this guy called David Mays, who was he was a WHRB DJ, who was also one of my classes. And he founded the Source magazine out of WHRB. And he basically, the initial mailing address is the WHRB studio. And so there was the Boston hip hop scene of that time. And basically we're talking 88, 89. That was blowing up as well. And so it was a lot of stuff. And, just one last person I just want to mention this whole sort of mix, in addition to all these bands sort of feeding into each other, is Billy Ruane.
The great Billy Ruane.
Oh my God. And basically you can't write the history of Boston rock without, Ruane. It was, again, he, as it turned out, we suspected at the time, but we didn't really know. A lot of these shows, he sort of just paid out of his own pocket, and he put these ridiculous bills together. He just brought everyone together. And anyone who knows Ruane from the day is like, you'd see him and it would just brighten up your entire day. It was like, you'd see the guy, he goes, Corey, and then he's like hugging you and he's kissing you and like slobbering on you. It was fantastic. I would see Billy, I was like, oh, basically it was like your day would just brighten. He just, again, he animated an entire scene. And I don't think Boston in the 80s, 90s, zeros would have been the same without
yeah, Billy. Billy. I loved Billy. He was a great guy. Absolutely. The HRB thing, was Jesse Perez and Ben also at HRB?
Yes.
You guys had quite a crew over there.
Yes. Yeah. It was also, to tell you the truth, it was a bit self-serving because I felt like I had it made. And in fact, to tell you the truth, if I had not won that fellowship to Rome, I would have chained myself to a radiator at Harvard and never left. Because we had LaVolta, we had Kurt, who worked in the photocopy shop, which I couldn't. All these bands going on. We had our own radio station that we had to provide 8 hours of programming a night, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. And so we were plugging our own bands. Okay. You couldn't, as a station rule, plug your own band, but Parrots is like going on about LaVolta, and and then I'd be going on about the Lemonheads. And also the other thing is that the Blake Babies were how I met the Lemonheads is I was at WHRB, and these high school kids, Commonwealth High School, Parrots, Diley, and Evan came by the studio and said, almost like, hey, mister, will you put this play our demo tape? I said, let's go out to the car and listen to it first, right? I said, I'm not going to put it out. Let's go to the car. So I go in the car and they put on Laughing All the Way at the Cleaners. They just recorded as high school seniors. And I fell out of the car. I was like, and then I had a horrible thought. How can I possibly exploit these teenagers who are just obviously like amazing, basically songwriters and and help, our band. I was in Meltdown at the time. And so basically I said, hey guys, do you want to play a show? And they had never played a show. And so we played on Green Street. Meltdown was the headliner. And this is 1986, July of 86.
Wow.
And then the first club gig, we just passed the 30 whatever anniversary of it. It was at the Rat in 86, was Meltdown open for the Lemonheads. But then within 2 months, they opened for the Ramones at Brandeis. They were like in a completely different category.
Yeah, they had a fast trajectory upwards. I have to talk to you about we haven't got to my favorite topic yet. We're getting to that, which is the Lovey album, but let me work my way up to that. So is the story, I guess the story goes like this: Bullet LaVolta and the Lemonheads were touring in Europe together. And I guess that's when you switched teams. Is that what happened?
It was basically, here's the chronology. I was in Meltdown first, and then Chris and I helped form Bullet LaVolta, but I knew I was going to Italy, so I leave Bullet LaVolta and Kenny steps in. And again, just think, Moving Targets, 1986, 87, with Pat Brady, with Pat Leonard, with Kenny. It's one of the greatest rock bands that's ever existed. I mean, anywhere. I mean, it was just like, and it was again electrifying to see. Kenny is a bona fide genius. Brady, on drums, one of the greatest punk rock drummers that's ever existed, and the late great Pat Brady. So basically, so there was a lot happening. So I go to Italy and I come back, and at the airport, the Lemonheads meet me, Evan and Jesse at Logan. They meet me at Logan, and they ask me to join the band. And of course, I say totally. And so with Diley, and there was frictions already between Diley and Evan, and it's just the story's often been told, but the Curtis basically comes to us and said, I have a Tang. Lemonheads were firmly on Tang. Bullet LaVolta was being signed to Tang, and Curtis says, I have a proposition for you guys to do a European tour, in the summer of '89, Bullet LaVolta and the Lemonheads. And I cannot tell you, again, I'm just getting excited thinking about it, like in that context, because even for all the unbelievable Boston bands that were playing at that time, they weren't really doing European tours, at that level yet, as far as I know. We couldn't believe it. And we went, it was the most fun ever. It was great because it was all, you didn't know where you were playing, but basically it was everything from like youth centers, punk youth centers, to like concert halls, 19th century concert halls. And so it was like interviews every place. There was no sort of surprises. One of the most amazing moments was playing in the old West Berlin, and you had to drive across East Germany in a van, and for like 6 hours, and to get to Berlin to play the club. We played this club called the Ecstasy Club, and I remember we had this incredibly heated argument, really almost violent argument in the van, because Bill Whalen said, in the future, we're not going to have record stores. We're going to have our computers, and he didn't use the word download, but he said, we're going to like listen to music, like files, computer files will be sent to our computers, and there's not going to be record stores. I said, this is ridiculous. How could there not be record stores, right?
Well, you were on the wrong side of that fight.
Yeah, who would not want to own it? Basically, and then Bill says, no, we're not going to have record stores. It's going to be all electronic, and basically, et cetera, et cetera. And it's going to revolutionize.
Genius.
But he was also saying, he says, we got to get on top of this somehow, because we're not going to, there's not going to be vinyl, there's not going to be CDs. That's where we're going to. Now, looking back, that was like, this is 1989, and there wasn't even the internet then. And so basically, but then one of my friends, Barnaby Nygren, HRB DJ, many, many years later said, well, if Bill really saw the future, he would have also predicted the comeback of vinyl. And but I remember it, but we went on for hours, and I was just, so that was
hilarious. So you were a member of the Lemonheads when you went to Europe. You weren't in Bullet LaVolta.
Yeah.
Was that awkward, or were you guys just all good friends?
No, we're all best friends. And the thing is, I played like a few songs with LaVolta at various gigs, and I'll tell you something, that LaVolta was one of the best live bands that's ever existed, ever. Basically ever. And they were playing at that point. By the time we went on this tour, LaVolta had really taken off. They were the biggest band in Boston at that time, and they were a lot tighter than the Lemonheads were. And then they went on and they played like 160 shows a year, and they were just phenomenal. So
I saw them, like I mentioned, I'd seen them in LA 3 times, and they were on fire on the dates I saw. It was after 1990, actually. I saw them.
Oh, they were just incredible up to the very end as a live band. And but these are like my best friends, and we were basically, the thing is, like, who hung out with each other? It's like we all hung out with each other, but basically, and it was a really good mix of personalities as well. And every single person who was on the tour, including Curtis as well. And because Curtis also filmed a lot of it, and so I have these VHS tapes of about 16 hours of the tour and a lot of the gigs and stuff like that. And it was just, you can just see, like, there was no sensation in the world. You pull into a town you never even heard of, and basically you see posters, with your your band's name on it. And also it was endless. We also did a Peel session. Lemonheads did a Peel session. And the two bands in Europe, the other thing that was actually sort of nice about it is that in some places, Lemonheads were bigger than LaVolta, and other places, LaVolta was bigger than the Lemonheads. for example, like, we were playing all these towns in Germany, in the Ruhr Valley, and basically and LaVolta was much bigger in Germany, whereas in Holland the Lemonheads were bigger. I mean, whatever, but basically, it was phenomenal. I'll talk forever about it. And Todd Phillips, who has played like roughly 1 million shows, I think would agree with me that 89 tour was the most fun ever.
You play on 2 songs that are on the Lemonheads Lick album, which is like a compilation, Luca and Mallow Cup, which to me, like, well, you know how big Luca became, but Mallow Cup's one of my favorite songs. I do like the Ben songs on that record a lot too. It was Lovey that I really want to talk to you about, because you put a pretty big stamp on that record. Paul Coldery told us when he was on the show that the band didn't have any songs ready to go, and
Correct.
a lot of the record was made in the studio. And
Correct.
the funniest part was, he said that Evan was goofing around playing brass buttons, and he said, "Can I just record this?" And he said, "Yeah." And that ended up being the single off the record. But
Yes.
the songs that you co-wrote, Little Seed and The Door, I think are brilliant. And that lineup right there was really, really a good lineup. What do you recall about the Lovey record? Because I have listed that as one of my favorite. It is my favorite Lemonheads record, and it's also one of my 20 most underrated records ever, because no one ever talks about that record. People always talk about Ray and all the other stuff, but Lovey, to me, it's like a masterpiece, man. I absolutely love it.
Well, here's the story: is that Lovey was the first 3 albums, including Lick, were on Tang, and Lick, we have to basically book a 8-hour show to talk about the making of Lick. I mean, and which was real, that album was really pulled together from a lot of. We didn't have an album; we had like 10 minutes worth of material, and so basically, so that's why it is the album. That's why we're doing Super Fatazione songs. That's why we're doing where it's just pulling a lot of stuff together. Lovey, yes, this is true. And the thing is, it was the first album for Atlantic, and I think Favorite Spanish Dishes came out before Lovey, or did it come up after? I can't remember. But basically, it was the first full-length album, and there was a lot riding on the Lemonheads, and they were at the next level. They were, playing shows, at a much, much higher level than when I was in them, because I was technically, whether I was in the Lemonheads or not was like sort of a bit of a question. Some gigs I would play, some I didn't. I remember one, anyway, the making of Lovey. I couldn't believe we were working with Coldery. Was also one of these things that he was already legendary. I mean, this was like, and he was a really good producer, and he also just ordered me around like in a really good way. I mean, he basically because with my solos and stuff like that, he would point out, he says, like, you just repeated that phrase 30 times, it's okay, so let's try it again. And he got the best out of me. He really, really sort of pushed me.
On The Door, man, your lead on that is friggin' phenomenal.
I don't remember. Basically, there was I remember the writing of Little Seed. Basically, in 89, 90, I had to write my dissertation and get out of Harvard. And I didn't get out of a bathrobe for a year. I basically just got up and I just wrote. And but I wasn't doing much with the Lemonheads. Sometimes I'd play with them, sometimes I wouldn't. But I really wanted to put together a show at the Middle East with Kenny Chambers and with Clay Tarver. And it was called Brennan Chambers Tarver Overdrive, BCTO. And so I just wanted to play, and just to get out of my bathrobe. And so I wrote songs for that occasion, but Little Seed was one of the ones that I wrote.
Wow.
And I wrote it for BCTO, and then of course, like, since the Lemonheads were short of material, they were happy to use it on the album. The Door, Evan and I wrote as a joke, and basically it was like a tribute to, there's this genre of 70s songs, there's a lot of them that start off slow, like Freebird's the most famous, and then they speed up. So we wanted to write something in like a 70s anthem, in sort of, a tribute to like the Outlaws, Greengrass and High Tides, a tribute to, Stairway to Heaven, all those songs that start off as ballads and then, and speed up with like a self-indulgent guitar solo. And so that's the story of the Door. And one of the coolest things about the door is that while we're recording it, there was some interference with the amp, with Evan's amp, and the radio starts coming over. So you hear this opera type thing that's coming, and that's actually live in the studio. That basically the tube picked up some sort of classical music, and we basically, we just went with it during the solo. And it was also recorded at, what's the name of the place? Synchro Sound, which is the car studio. I might remember, no, it was at Fort Apache. I'm trying to remember where it was recorded, but whatever studio it was also was a step up. I think it was at Fort Apache, but basically, for some reason, someplace. Oh no, we recorded lick parts. We recorded lick at parts of Lick at Synchro Sound. That was also like, I felt like, it was Rick Okasek's studio, and I felt like Boston rock royalty. So, but thanks for your nice words about Lovey. It was like, and no one knew which way things were going to go, but I think from the first note that record is fantastic.
It's like a guitar rock record, I think, it's like, it's not like any other record that the Lemonheads did. That's probably why, Brass Buttons is like, kind of like more Lemonheads, even though it's a cover, than everything on that record. That there's some serious, it's like more like Dinosaur Jr., I think, than the Lemonheads, that record. That's why I like it. Not that I love all the Lemonheads records, every one of them, but that one's my favorite.
I'll tell you two stories about Little Seed, because I have not ever talked about this ever in my life. I'll tell you two stories. One of which is that I was with the Lemonheads. I'm backstage, it's in Germany or wherever, and basically I'm just warming up and I'm playing Little Seed, and this guy comes in and grabs the guitar and says, "No, that's not how it's played at all. These are the chords of Little Seed." And of course, like, I wrote the song, so basically, the second thing was about Little Seed is that the lead is irreproducible live, because it's 4 different tunings. Like the lead, I tuned the guitar 4 different ways during the lead. So basically, it's a
whoa.
You can do that in the studio, but you can't do it live.
That's hardcore, man.
That was Coldray. That's total Coldray. That's like, yeah.
There was one other thing I have to ask you about. You're a good interview. You can talk about a lot of cool stuff, man. I appreciate that. I was watching the footage of the Bill Whalen tribute. Pretty cool. I wish I would have known about that. I would have liked to have gone, but I think, was that just an impromptu thing? Did you guys rehearse?
The night before, 24 hours. Oh my Lord. That was Bill Whalen, for your viewers and your listeners, was the bass player of Bullet LaVolta. And he was really the heart and soul of LaVolta. I mean, he took it so seriously, and he was an amazing figure. He's the only person I know who was a musician at the top level of a musician, an athlete, and a scholar. I mean, he was a Harvard graduate. He was a Harvard basketball player. He was an amazing designer, also creative. I mean, he was just an incredible figure. And he took his own life in 2020, late 2021. And so in 2022, we had a tribute. And for complicated reasons, there were 2 memorial services. There was one at the Harvard Faculty Club, and there was one at Zuzu's, which is part of the Middle East complex.
Yeah.
And Square. As of the night before, we didn't know where they're going to play. We didn't know whether we could do it. We didn't know whether they could feel like it. We didn't know whether they could pull it together. And we basically got together in Dorchester. And Todd Phillips, who was like the ideal person to fill in for the late Bill Whalen. We just got together. We said, tell you what, let's do it this way. Let's hang out. Let's get some food. Let's drink some beer. Let's go to the studio, see what it sounds like. If it's embarrassing, we're not going to do it. If it isn't embarrassing, we will do it, or whatever, et cetera. And so we started playing, and it was like old times. It was like, and it wasn't for a band. I had not played with them for 35 years. Bullet LaVolta had not played a note together for 30 years. And we said, we can probably pull this off. So we actually, on the shortest of notice, we do the show. And Ben Diley played, and I mean, he played beforehand, and a few other folks. The Reverend Hank Pierce basically gave a benediction and a homily, which was phenomenal. He's my personal confessor and spiritual mentor. And then we played the show, and it was just poignant, It's just like, and I have to admit that up to that point, I didn't think I'd ever get on stage again, like to play. at all. And so we played, and it was a lot of fun. I mean, and to the point where like now next year's the 35th anniversary of The Gift. Anyone want to stage a Bullet LaVolta reunion? I would love to play, even if it's one show in Boston, just play The Gift in its entirety and go home.
Oh, I think a lot of people would enjoy that.
I co-wrote a lot of the songs on The Gift. And
You did?
Yeah, even it came out in 89. Basically a lot of those songs were written in 87 and 88 with Bill and with Clegg.
But you don't play on that record at all, right?
No. Also, I just want to really stress that by the time I left LaVolta and then I came back after a year in Italy, it had transformed into something completely different. I mean, like much more professional than I was capable of. I mean, these guys were the real thing. I mean, they had played like 100 shows after I left. And by the time I sort of alluded to this earlier, that even when I played with them on tour, I played one or two songs, I realized they were much tighter and I could not have toured with, I didn't have that level of professionalism to basically play with the LaVolta at its height.
Wow. A lot of good stuff, Corey. Yeah, DJ Cornelius.
Yeah, this is periodically what I do is like basically I come up with these like ridiculous unsustainable schemes. And so I teach now at Rutgers University of New Jersey. So I don't take up 4 terabytes of your storage. Basically, here, let me just round out the story. So after leaving the Lemonheads in 91, I did a second European tour with them. Then I recorded a solo album with Chris Brokaw from Come and
Meltdown House. Yeah.
Meltdown House, which and we did it with Wharton Tears, who had produced Dinosaur. He had Dinosaur Jr., Helmet, Sonic Youth, and that was, again, it was like, it was a real experience. The album is less than the sum of its parts. There's a few moments. We did play one show at the Middle East, which I thought went okay. And then nothing. After teaching at Bryn Mawr College, a tiny college 11 miles west of Philadelphia, where I didn't do much music, but basically I moved to Rutgers, and it's really spoke to me. 65,000 students. I mean, it's my personality. It's just like, it's a really, really, really great and very free place, academically free place. Like I just feel that for collaboration, I mean, and also it's a comprehensive university. So like, filmmaking to truck logistics, anything, any sort of area of knowledge, there's someone who's an expert on it. And so I get there and I got really excited by sort of the environment. I said, I'm going to DJ at Rutgers at shows. And so I formed this, so I basically DJ Cornelius, and because I was listening to a lot of house music, I was listening to salsa and stuff like that. So it was sort of crossover. And I continued to do that until even in Italy. I was DJing a lot in Italy. So I moved to Italy with my family 2009 to 2012. But then I retired on the highest note possible. I DJ'd a dance for my daughter's 5th grade sort of graduation, basically at the school with 4th and 5th graders. And it was the best gig I've ever played, ever, like any medium, guitar, DJ, whatever. And basically I said, I'm quitting, I'm stopping. I still have a PA system in my basement. I listen a lot. I listen to pretty much everything. I'm having an enormous 1980s sort of revival right now in my brain. But I'd like to sort of, quietly see what the other guys in LaVolta feel like. But because I think that next year, even if it was one show, and the Boston audiences, there's a lot of goodwill toward LaVolta to this day. I felt, and sorry, one last thing I want to say is the Bill Whalen Memorial. I've already spoken 1 million words, but basically the Bill Whalen Memorial, it was I'd say it's a turning point in my adult life. I'm 63 now, but basically it was a moment because I love the guys in the band, I love the music, and I loved everyone in the room. I mean, I looked in the room and every single person I either knew for 4 decades or was, well disposed. So basically that was a high point. But right after coming out of that, I was like, maybe we can keep this going somehow. But I'd love to do a LaVolta show.
I think you've quietly got the word out there.
Oh, excellent.
Thank you, Corey.
Oh, I can't thank you enough. This is a great honor. And as you can tell, I was just warming up. I mean, basically, you'd have to, go for serious storage to basically get the full amount of my verbiage.
Well, I
A great
enjoyed every
honor.
minute.
Okay, and we'll take it from there. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Corey. Have a good one.
Okay, to be
Bye.
continued. Thank you.